Welcome, everyone. Good evening. Hope you are well. It's your host, Danny Haiphong. Please do give me a minute to get Rumble and Rockfin going here. It is really good to be with all of you. I wanted to start right away because we do have breaking news about Hezbollah striking northern Israel, penetrating the Iron Dome dramatically. This is happening as we speak. So I will report on that information because that has everything to do with the topic I had at hand to begin here today in terms of Russia's role in supporting the axis of resistance, supporting Iran's oncoming strike. And now we have definitive proof of what has been a pretty big warning that Russia and Vladimir Putin has sent to both Israel and the United States regarding its ongoing flamethrower, scorched earth policy in West Asia, particularly targeting Gaza, but of course, the rest of the axis of resistance. So we are going to get to that right away here. So what I'm going to do is say, please do hit the like button. Please do that because that helps boost the stream and the algorithm. Give me a quick sound check in the live chat because this is a live video, but I want to be respectful also to the viewers who will be watching this on replay. So give me a sound check. We're going to get right to it. Hit the like button, hit that subscribe button. If you are new here, hit that notifications bell. So maybe, perhaps YouTube will notify you when I go live. Do also go to the video description and support this work on Patreon at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. This is such a momentous period in history, everyone. I hope that you all are appreciative as well as perhaps a little scared of every breath that you take in this moment geopolitically, because we are really on the precipice of something incredibly dangerous, but yet just absolutely ripe with opportunities to bring the world to a much better place than it is right now. So, we are going to get started in just a minute here as you all come in and you hit that like button. And I'm just going to go a little bit of a rundown of the show tonight. So I'm going to cover the top story, which is Vladimir Putin's warning to Israel. What does this mean? It's a dire warning. And I'm going to talk about how war is waged on so many different fronts, and that oftentimes, as frustrations mount over the Gaza genocide, it isn't really noticed just how much the axis of resistance, as well as its allies in Russia and China, are doing what they can to move progress and peace forward. I'm going to show you what Russia has been preparing, not just with Hezbollah now, because we're going to get into the breaking story as Hezbollah pounds the IDF with Russian missiles, but we are also going to talk about how the collective West, how Israel is going crazy over Russia Iranian bilateral meetings of late. Then we're going to get into the Kursk invasion that Ukraine has launched over the last week or so. I believe we are closing in on day 7 of that. What does it all mean? Why is Ukraine doing this? Does it make any difference at all? The Western mainstream media seems to think so, but we have a different take here. And then, if there is time, we are going to talk about a dangerous confrontation that the United States had recently with China that no one is talking about, and it happened in the South China Sea. We will get to that at the end. So, everyone, we have a big show today. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notifications bell, and let us get started. And for all of you who want to timestamp this, we are getting started around the 4:15 mark on the content, maybe plus or minus as I get going. So let's get started. Vladimir Putin has issued a dire warning to Israel as Israel's ongoing genocide absolutely shocks the world. And as the axis of resistance amplifies and accelerates and escalates its opposition and its fight back against the Israeli regime. Now, there's breaking news that has come out today, and and for those who are viewing this in the replay, or viewing this a day later, we have breaking news of, and this is happening August 11th, Hezbollah rocket attack on Israel. And you might say, Danny, there's been rocket attacks on Israel, on northern Israel, for many, many months. And this is true, but read the report here. This is from X. This is August 11th. Hezbollah launched a significant rocket attack from Lebanon into northern Israel, targeting areas such as Nahariya and Kabri. The attack involved 30 rockets, including Russian-made Katyusha rockets, and was notable for its scale and the apparent failure of Israel's Iron Dome system to intercept many of the rockets. The incident has sparked widespread discussion and concern, with various sources reporting the impact and implications of the attack, including the penetration of the Iron Dome. This has been an ongoing conversation as there is a coming storm from Iran after Israel's assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, and of course in Lebanon of Fawad Shakur. Now we are seeing Hezbollah strike back. They announced this, and I'm going to pull up the Cradle, which is a great source on everything West Asia. The Cradle has cited what Hezbollah announced just August 11th, as we are speaking, in support of our steadfast Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip and in support of their valiant and audible resistance. And in response to the Israeli enemy's attack on the steadfast southern villages and safe homes, especially on the town of Marub, the Islamic resistance fighters bombed on Monday, 8/12/2024, the newly established headquarters of the 146th Division's command in Jatun with a barrage of Katyusha rockets. So Katyusha rockets are flying over Israel. They are striking the Iron Dome, okay? Or they are penetrating the Iron Dome as we speak here. This is huge news because this is something that Lebanese media, and mind you, Al Mayadeen, this is the breaking report from Al Mayadeen, they have just been banned in Israel and labeled a terrorist organization. But here they report that the Islamic resistance announces the targeting of new headquarters of the 146th Division in Gatan in northern Palestine with a barrage of Katyusha missiles. So these are the reports coming out right now. And of course, this is not something necessarily new that Hezbollah is attacking northern Israel. But what is new, and unfortunately we cannot show the video footage here because YouTube often takes down videos. I just had this happen to me this past week. We won't show the footage of the missile barrage, but all reports indicate that the Iron Dome has been penetrated. And just so you don't say, well, there's no proof of that, the Cradle actually did post a video, and there you can see brief footage, but I am not going to play it in full here because it's very likely that we will get shut down. So that is happening as we speak, and that is part of this. Katyusha missiles are Russian missiles. They are Soviet era missiles. And just some context as to the Russia-Hezbollah relationship that has to do with this dire warning that has come from Vladimir Putin and Russia over what is happening in Gaza, what is happening in the region, is the context, which is so important here, is that Russia recognizes Hezbollah as a legitimate political organization and military organization, one that has official status inside of the Lebanese government and is within the coalition that is the most popular and leading political force in Lebanon. So not only does Russia recognize Hezbollah, but Russia has deep relations with Hezbollah that you can trace to the protection and defense of the Syrian government during the US-led, NATO-led dirty war there beginning in 2011. Okay, so that is where this really begins. Of course, Russia and Hezbollah had relations before this, but they collaborated and cooperated to fight ISIS, to fight the al-Nusra Front, terrorist groups that were being funded by the Gulf monarchies, by Israel. They were being armed by NATO. They were being armed by regional countries, the so-called Gulf monarchies, to invade Syria and overthrow the government. And then Russia stepped in 2015 and worked with all forces, including Hezbollah, which was fighting inside of Syria, to destroy these groups. And it paid huge dividends, and that relationship never stopped. And that is part of this war that is not being talked about. So Hezbollah at this moment is pounding Israel and pounding the IDF with Russian missiles. And this is not a coincidence. This is part of an overall geopolitical calculus where Russia, while it maintains relations with Israel and does not want to see a wider war, does not want to see a conflagration, does not want to see its relationship with Israel broken entirely. It is very angry at Israel, not just for its ongoing airstrikes on Syria, which is a completely unacceptable to Vladimir Putin and Russia, but it's also very angry about developments in West Asia, not with the Gaza genocide. I'm going to pull up now, okay, because this is coming as there was a huge strike, right? An Israeli strike on a school in Gaza City that killed over 100 Palestinians in Gaza City. Now, this school in Gaza City was being used. This occurred on August 10th, I believe. Yes, August 10th. And it hit the Al Tabin school, multiple 2,000-pound bombs, all made in the USA. 2,000-pound bombs, 3 of them, killed 100 Palestinians, many of them women and children. So bad was the damage of this bomb that the bodies were unrecognizable. They were incinerated. They were not bodies anymore. They were essentially they were piles of ash, and that ash, that stuck together ash, had to be measured and weighted in order to tell, well, who was an adult and who was a child. And they weighed what was left of the human beings, the Palestinians that were killed, in order to tell how many children and how many adults were killed. Absolutely despicable and disgusting. And that death toll is going to go up. That's just one crime that Israel committed in a litany of crimes in this genocide, which has led to this situation. Remember. And here's what Russia had to say about it. Russia was furious about this. They were furious about this. They said that the attack that reportedly killed 100 people was deeply shaking Maria Zakharova, who, is the foreign ministry spokeswoman and arguably speaks on behalf of Sergei Lavrov and Vladimir Putin, said that they are deeply shaken by the latest airstrike. And while offering condolences, they are calling on Israel, condolences to the Palestinian families, to refrain from attacks on civilian targets. We believe there's no and can be no justifications for such actions. And so many people have criticized Russia for not doing more. And I understand where that comes from, because what is happening in West Asia right now could very well spill over into a wider, hot, incredibly violent and damaging, and really just absolutely earth-shattering economic collapse for the rest of the world, a humanitarian crisis that extends far beyond Gaza. But just talking about Gaza, 189,000 plus people and counting, according to the Lancet, killed by Israel in less than 1 year in a highly concentrated, essentially prison camp that Israel has been administering and occupying for all of this time. And not occupying. Yes, they're occupying because they have political and economic control over entire people's lives that they have stuffed into now what is a cauldron for non-stop bombing and military operations. So all of this is to say is that Russia's not happy about this. Russia's not happy about this, and they're not happy with what occurred in Tehran, the assassination of Hamas's top negotiator, Ismail Haniyeh, and they are making moves that are, Russia is making moves that are scaring the collective West, scaring NATO, scaring Israel. Here is a report from the Foreign Policy magazine, which is a neocon rag. Okay, the Kremlin plays a Mideast crisis broker. Russia doesn't want Iran to escalate, they say, but it's also giving Tehran weapons. That's part of this warning, is that Tehran gets weapons. Iran gets weapons. Iran has been armed by Russia, and Russia has also requested arms, and we're going to get to this right now. Okay, so here's the report. It says, standing by Iran with the Middle East on tenterhooks, waiting for Iran's response to recent assassinations of senior figures in Hamas and Hezbollah, widely attributed to Israel. It's Moscow dispatched former Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu to Tehran for meetings with the president's senior security officials. This happened last week, the end of the first week of August. It's the latest sign of deepening ties between the two countries as they work to strengthen an anti-U.S. alliance. Shoigu now serves as Secretary of Russia's Security Council. He's the head of the National Security Council. Following a cabinet reshuffle in May, met with Iran's new president, Masoud Pezeshkian, and with Major General Mohammad Bagheri, chief of Iran's armed forces, on Monday, August 6th. Russia is among the countries that have stood with the Iranian nation in difficult times, said Pezeshkian to Shoigu. So they urge restraint, of course. Russia says they want all parties to avoid actions that could push the Middle East into a wider war. But Reuters reported that Russian President Vladimir Putin, through Shoigu, had urged restraint in Iran's response and advised Tehran against attacking civilians. They reaffirm our principled and consistent need to refrain from any actions that could further escalation. However, that is the diplomatic speak of Russia. They will never on this world stage say that they support conflagration and escalation in war. They want to maintain diplomatic ties with Israel and all countries in the region, and they don't want to see an economic lifeline completely cut off because of the absolute chaos that an Israel-Iran war would ignite. So here is the but, okay? There's some, I don't know why they thought there was hope that that Russia would do the U.S.'s dirty work in playing peacemaker, aka drawing Iran back from attacking. They've got influence, as the Westerners thinking, maybe, just maybe, but no one is hoping, right? U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller isn't hoping. None of these think tank neocons are hoping this. Why? Because Russia and Iran have strengthened their defense ties in recent years as Tehran has supplied material strapped Moscow with attack drones and missiles to help it carry out its war in Ukraine. The two countries are working on a cooperation pact, according to statements from the Russian Foreign Ministry. Iran has reportedly requested radars and air defense equipment from Russia, with deliveries already underway, says the New York Times. The Iranians have an extensive wish list from Russia, says Hana Note, Eurasia director for the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies. Top of the list for Iran is Russian Su-35 jets, which have been incredibly effective inside of Ukraine. The two countries finalized an agreement late last year, according to the Iranian Deputy Defense Minister, General Mahdi Fari, under a deal that would help modernize Iranian Air Force's aging fleet. Moscow is yet to deliver the jets, though, something Tehran reportedly pressed Shoigu on during the visit. The two countries are also cooperating on electronic warfare, where Russia has advanced capabilities that have plagued Ukrainian armed forces by jamming U.S. weapon systems. And ostensibly, they would do this to Israel. Catch my drift, okay? So there's greater knowledge diffusion now between these two countries. And here is what the New York Times report had to say after Shoigu's visit, where they do reveal that there are weapons going to Iran from Russia, and it could very well be vice versa, which we're going to get to in a second. So this is just a meeting on, this is just an article on the meeting, okay, where they talk about support. Sergei Shoigu, we are ready for full cooperation with Iran on regional issues. The big one is Israel. The big one is Israel right now, okay? Iran has provided Russia with military drones, and the two countries have finalized an agreement to expand military cooperation. Two Iranian officials familiar with the war planning confirmed that Iran has made a request and said Russia has started delivering advanced radars and air defense equipment. The official spoke on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss the aid publicly. So there you have it. There are arms deliveries underway. And now we are seeing Hezbollah use Russian missiles that ostensibly they've had they've had these Soviet supplied weapons, these Soviet weapons, because Russia has been cooperating with Hezbollah, the Syrian government, with Iran, when there was and still is an incursion into Syria during the dirty war. This is what we are talking about here. We are talking about a we're talking about a foreign policy by Russia, which is antithetical to Israel's overall designs. Putin is sending a warning in a way that you won't hear or see. You won't be able to read it. You won't be able to hear it, because that warning is happening through action. The actions of Russia are solidifying the axis of resistance. You could say Russia could do more. You could say Russia could take a side, but that would be incredibly mistaken in this diplomatic environment where Russia is fighting a war itself in Ukraine. All right. And so this is the latest news as well. The Jerusalem Post, as Hezbollah is making these strikes inside of Israeli territory, inside, or you should say it's Palestinian territory, but inside of northern occupied Israel or northern occupied Palestine. Here we have the Iranian military delegation is right now in Russia as of August 11th. Last Tuesday, the New York Times reported that Tehran had begun requesting Russia to use its advanced air defense systems. Okay, so Iranian military delegation in Russia as we speak. I mean, this is all developing so fast as we are preparing to see how how Hezbollah's operation that it has just launched in northern Israel. Of course, it has been pounding, right? It has been pounding northern Israel for many months, but it has now accelerated that and has announced that this is a bigger operation and using Russian missiles to do it. Okay, so there's a lot of panic about this. There's a lot of panic about Russia's role, especially in relation to Iran. So here is what Israeli media Haaretz had to say. Western powers increasingly concerned about growing Russia-Iran cooperation. After reports that Russia is providing military aid to Iran and has tried to supply weapons to the Houthis, Western diplomats are ringing alarms. Russia's involvement worries us a lot, and it should also worry Israel, as one diplomat told Haaretz. The United States and European powers have expressed concern in recent days over Russia's growing involvement in the Middle East conflict, especially Moscow's cooperation with Iran and assistance it's providing to Ansarallah, aka the Houthis, in the Western mindset. The issue came up in conversations between U.S. and Israeli counterparts, U.S. officials and Israeli counterparts. The main concern of the Americans and Europeans is that Russia will exploit tensions to advance its interests in the Middle East and help Iran and terrorist organizations allied to it continue fighting Israel. Okay, so that is the worry inside of Washington. There is a lot of worry inside of Washington, inside of the collective West. Okay, so here's the thing. It's not just Russia. All right, because this relationship that Russia has with Iran and the axis of resistance is very much strategic, right? So here you have Iran. This is from Euronews. Okay, Iran and Russia to accelerate strategic partnership. And what they're talking about here is not just military aid, which is going to be very important, right? It's well documented, as they say here, as Russia has been provided Shahed drones to fire on Ukraine as just one example. But we also have the other examples of Russia giving air defense equipment now to Iran as it prepares for this retaliation against Israel. But the report also detailed the need, from Iran's side to implement agreements between the two countries to strategic partnership, with Russia delegate emphasizing the necessity to speed up the building of the North-South Corridor, a 7,200-kilometer multi-mode transport network connecting a range of countries, including Russia and Iran. Okay, so that is the goal, all sectors, and that there's a very good prospect for the development of these interactions. Okay, so that is the most important part of this for these two sides. But it's not just Russia and Iran. It's Russia, China, and Iran. This is the new axis of evil that we keep hearing about from the collective West. We constantly hear that it is Russia, China and Iran that are threatening, right? Threatening the United States, threatening the collective West's overall interests, their desire to dominate the world. Well, in some respects, they are correct, but for the wrong reasons. They don't explain that, in fact, the reason why Russia, China, and Iran are so much more influential in West Asia, for example, is that they're offering an alternative to endless war, militarization, potential nuclear conflict, genocide, like what is happening in Gaza with its, heavily armed attack dog, Israel. This is why there is all of this energy, all of this momentum toward Russia, China, and Iran. But look at China. China says it supports Iran in defending its security. So Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, got on the phone with the newly appointed foreign minister of Iran and told him straight up that they support the defense of Iran's security. What does that mean? It means that what Iran does here has legitimacy. Whatever it does to defend itself from the attack on its soil has legitimacy. It doesn't mean that China signs off on the particular actions that Iran may take, especially if those actions lead to a broader conflagration. No, that's not what China is saying here. What China is saying here is that it supports Iran in defending itself, meaning that it has the right to. And China, of course, has made this case about Palestine, has made this case about Gaza, that the people there have the right to defend themselves via international law, the right of armed self-defense. Iran has the same right. In a phone call, Wang Yi repeated Beijing's denunciation of the assassination of Hamas's chief Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran on July 31st, saying the strike violated Iran's sovereignty and threatened regional stability. Iran and Palestinian, I'm not Islamist group, Iran and Hamas have accused Israel of carrying out the strike that killed Haniyeh. But Israel, which it always does not confirm or deny the responsibility for the killing, which is fueled concern that the war between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip was turning into a wider Middle East war. Iran has vowed to harshly punish Israel over the assassination. Wang Yi told Ali Bagheri Khani, the Iranian acting foreign minister, that the killing of Haniyeh directly undermined Gaza's ceasefire negotiation process and undermined regional peace and stability. China supports Iran defending sovereignty, security, and national dignity with the law and its efforts to maintain regional peace and stability, and stands ready to maintain close communication with Iran. So, what does this mean? This means that China is saying, we're not going to get in your way. Do what you feel like you need to do as a sovereign nation to defend yourself, to assert dignity, to respond to what was a deep violation of international law and of your territorial integrity. We will not get in the way. That's because China understands not only that international law gives Iran the capability and the right to make such a response, but China would never want to stand alone if something similar were to happen to China. That is the bond, that is the link that connects China, Russia, and Iran at just one level. It's the fact that all three of them are under attack from one global system, the unipolar order led by the United States, different nodes of that system, whether it's NATO in Ukraine against Russia, whether it is the United States arming, funding, backing Israel as it commits genocide in Gaza and tries to start a regional war, whether it is China facing down the United States, the militarization of the entire Asia Pacific across the First Island chain, across the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, Guam. We can go on and on and on. There is a heavy and deep militarization of the entire region against China, not least in Taiwan, which is Chinese territory according to international law. So all of this is to say is that the United States and Israel are messing around. They're fucking around, and they're about to find out. And Putin has sent a very strong warning, as well as China, because China is involved in this as well in terms of giving diplomatic solidarity to Iran and the axis of resistance to defend themselves where they need and should be defended. Neither of them support a wider war in West Asia. They don't want to see Iran and Israel fight a protracted war of attrition or anything, or any nuclear proliferation that Israel is capable of engineering. This could get very bad very quick. But China and Russia are standing behind those forces which have seen their territorial integrity and their sovereignty trampled on. And that is the big warning that Vladimir Putin in particular has sent to Israel here by arming and supporting a force like Hezbollah. And now Hezbollah making these strikes onto Israel and penetrating the Iron Dome. That's a message sent that Russia, while it is not trying to get involved directly, it has already announced that U.S. adversaries are on the table to be supported, because look at who the United States has been funding and arming: Ukraine. Look at what it has been doing, funding and arming Ukraine to literally invade Russian territory, which is happening right now in Kursk. Russia has said it will do the same elsewhere. So now there's reports about arming Ansarallah, but Iran getting increased military assistance. Now we have Hezbollah striking with Russian missiles, right, into northern Israel. And just a last note on Hezbollah's attack before we end here. Israel was already noting, this is before this operation that was just announced. Okay, this was before the operation that was just announced. Hezbollah attacks growing deadlier by the day. Head of the Upper Al Jalil Regional Council, Geo Results, criticizes the Israeli government for its strategy in the north, which has left tens of thousands unable to return to settlements. Hezbollah is pacing up its operation on the northern front. We just saw how paced up it has gotten. Okay, this is a report just from yesterday. So we have Geo Results saying, okay, head of this Israeli Security Council, actually it's a local governing authority for this occupied territory. They criticize the central Israeli government, including Netanyahu, on the Israeli Broadcasting Corporation. So they discovered Netanyahu's government did. They said that there's an enemy in the northern borders called Hezbollah, and it awaits a response to the assassination of Fouad Shakur. He stressed that the situation in the north is deteriorating from bad to worse as daily warning sirens sound across northern occupied territories due to Hezbollah's drone and rocket attacks. The Israeli official revealed that dozens of settlers' housing units have been destroyed, vast areas have been burnt, and dozens of casualties have been recorded among soldiers and settlers of the Israeli kind. In addition to the material human losses suffered by the Israeli occupation, Zoltz pointed to the completely dysfunctional, sirens like that one, pointed to the completely dysfunctional healthcare, banking, and educational sectors in the north. Zoltz reiterated his calls for a radical change in the Israeli government strategy in the north that would allow evacuated settlers to return to their colonial outposts. So around 40% of evacuees from the settlements in northern occupied Palestine are contemplating not returning even after the war ends, because they know that Hezbollah has fired thousands of rockets, anti-tank missiles, and drones toward the settlements and military outposts of the occupied Golan Heights in Syria and Upper Al Jalil, supporting the Palestinian resistance. Why won't they come back? It's because they know this is not going to end. The settlers. This is the problem that Israel has gotten itself in. That's not going to stop. Israel has opened up a can of worms that it cannot close. And that can of worms is the end of its existence. Because the axis of resistance is not going to stop just because the genocide stops. But the genocide hasn't even stopped. Even if it does, though, Israel has sent a message to the region that it needs to be arrested. It needs to be brought to heel. It needs to be controlled. It needs to be put on a leash. The United States isn't putting Israel on a leash because the United States wants to use Israel as its attack dog. It wants to use it as its unsinkable aircraft carrier. Of course, Israel is essentially a landlocked colony. It does border a sea, but it's a colony that maybe the metaphor doesn't really work for, but the message is the same. It is an incredibly valuable military asset to the United States. even if Israel in its actions and behaviors are antithetical to a broader long-term strategic posture for the United States. That is the conundrum for the US, because without Israel, the United States is done in the Middle East. It cannot hold influence. There's no soft power in the US's overall foreign policy strategy at this time. It's over. It's gone. That's never going to work again. And that arguably you could say completely and was utterly and completely destroyed when the United States invaded Afghanistan and then Iraq in 2001, 2003. Completely destroyed, killed over 1 million people. You don't come back from that. You don't become legitimate. In fact, the US is about to get kicked out of Iraq very soon. We hear this almost every couple months that Iraq is going to get rid of the troops. But we actually now, I think it has been confirmed that Iraq will finally close up that so-called coalition of the willing that has been occupying Iraq all of this time. But all of this is to say, everybody, the big point here is that Vladimir Putin has sent a big message to Israel. So too has Iran. So too has China. The multipolar world is going to do everything it can within the limits and the confines of this international system, because there are limits and there are confines, in order to bring about an end to this carnage and the threat of a greater conflagration. But Hezbollah is already on its way to escalating its operations, penetrating the Iron Dome. Iran's attack is coming soon. Heck, when this video comes out on replay, it very well might have already happened. But all this is to say is that we cannot discount and discredit all of what Vladimir Putin and what Russia is doing and the multipolar world is doing here to support the axis of resistance if Hezbollah's now escalating operation on the northern occupied area called Israel is of any indication. All right, everybody. We're going to get to the next topic. We have 5,000 people here because this is a breaking story. So bear with me as I pull up the next story, okay? Bear with me as I pull up the next story for all of you. Okay, we're going to talk about Kursk. It's another situation that is absolutely just so incredibly dangerous. Okay, I'm talking about an incredibly dangerous development that must be analyzed correctly here, because we are getting so much misinformation from the mainstream media about what's happening in Kursk, because there's such a need to try to inject momentum, inject enthusiasm to what is happening in Ukraine, which is nothing good for Ukraine and nothing good for NATO. But Kursk is now this kind of front line of the conflict, supposedly. But is it? Is it really? So I'm just going to pull up the sources, okay, so we can talk about this correctly. All right. It's absolutely astounding, right? This quote is attributed to Vladimir Lenin, but there's the quote of, there are decades where nothing happens, and then days where decades happen. Well, it often feels like we are in a period where decades are happening as we speak. So let us get started. All right. Ukraine has been launching a literal invasion into Russia for now, what will be likely over a week once you all watch this video. And this invasion, which of course is rubber stamped by NATO, has injected a level of enthusiasm not seen since the Western mainstream media hyped up the 2023 counteroffensive, which ended up failing. But really, we haven't seen this kind of enthusiasm for a literal action, one that is undergoing, an operation that is ongoing, since the 2022 offensive launched by Ukraine, which saw Russia have to pull back from many key areas of the front line. And of course, now we know that this was part of Russia's overall strategy, but then it was seen as a major loss from Russia. But this invasion by Ukraine is into the Kursk region, okay, which is across the Ukrainian-Russian border, right, about parallel with a Ukrainian territory called Sumy. And it is said that Ukraine had been making, beginning at the end of the first week of August, when they launched this operation, over a dozen kilometers of progress into this region. And there was also reports that missiles, the Ukraine was launching NATO sorties at the Kursk nuclear power plant, which Russia struck down. But if it would have hit, we would have had something much bigger than Chernobyl on our hands. That's how dangerous this has all gotten. But according to the Western mainstream media, this is a time to celebrate. And here is what The Guardian has to say about it. Ukraine aims to destabilize Russia with thousands of troops in Kursk incursion. Official says Kiev is seeking to stretch the enemy and that Western partners have been indirectly involved. Well, of course, there is nothing that Ukraine does without the collective West, in particular, the United States. So, thousands of Ukrainian troops are taking part in an incursion aiming to destabilize Russia by showing up the country's weaknesses, a top official from Ukraine has said as the assault enters the sixth day. So this was the sixth day as of, I believe, this was written August 11th. So it began technically August 5th. We're on the offensive, okay, says this unnamed official. The aim is to stretch the positions of the enemy, to inflict maximum losses, and to destabilize the situation in Russia as they are unable to protect their own border. And I'm going to show you with a wonderful analysis of the battlefield situation by Brian Berletic, why this is so absolutely and incredibly stupid of Ukraine. An incredibly stupid move. This is a dumb move. This is not a good move. This is not a strategic move. Now, Russia was caught off guard, and a lot of people who believe in Russia's position say, well, they got here. They got. Not so fast, and we're gonna talk to you about why. So Russia's army has said about 1,000 Ukrainian troops were deployed in the cross-border incursion that began on Tuesday, August 5th, and appeared to catch the Kremlin off guard, allowing Ukrainian forces to penetrate Russia's defensive lines. According to the official, it's a lot more than the 1,000 troop figure. Okay, that Russia was saying that it's thousands. So this operation, this is the this is the enthusiasm, right? Ukrainian troops are advancing several kilometers into the Kursk region, forcing Russia's army to rush in reserves and extra equipment. Neither side has given precise details of the forces committed. Russia has evacuated tens of thousands of civilians, and Ukraine has also evacuated thousands of people from the Sumy region across the border, which I was telling you about. The operation has greatly raised our morale, says the Ukrainian official, of the army, the state, and society. It has shown we can go on the offensive and move forward. It seems the Russians have problems with coordination, preparedness, and action. But the official explained there have been little effect so far on fighting in the east. That's unchanged. Their pressure in the east continues. They're not pulling troops out of that area. The intensity of Russian attacks has gone down only a little bit. There's no idea of annexation. We are operating in strict accordance with international law, which is hilarious because literally the United States and NATO have armed Ukraine to the teeth and have green-lighted attacks on Russian territory, and now Ukraine is invading Russian territory. That's akin to international law. That's hypocrisy, because this is what they've been claiming Russia has been doing all of this time. But let us get into the nuts and bolts of this invasion. And Brian Berletic published this great video, which we are going to react to, because his analysis of the situation is really important, because he is going to tell you about what is happening actually on the battlefield and how it relates to this Kursk invasion. It does not spell optimism for Ukraine, as we're hearing in the Western mainstream media. Here we go.
This Ukraine decided to take some of its best units off the line of contact that they are incapable of holding and sent them on an incursion into Kursk, Russia. This is inside pre-2014 Russian borders, indisputably internationally recognized Russian territory. And this is the first time the Ukrainian government has openly done this. They had done this before in Belgorod, but they had claimed at the time that these were militant groups separate from the Ukrainian government, even though they were using Ukrainian military equipment and also American military equipment. So it was obviously a Ukrainian government operation, but they were attempting to maintain some sort of plausible deniability. In this case, they're not even trying to do that. They are just openly sending their forces into Kursk. Let's take a look at the battlefield. This is via liveuamap.com. It is a pro-Ukrainian live map. Keep that in mind as we look at it. And as I've been pointing out every single week, Russian forces continue to advance along the entire line of contact, including right now. And you can see all these red rifle icons. This is where Russian forces are pushing. You can see it extends along the entirety of the line of contact from west of Donetsk and Avdiivka into New York. There's a Ukrainian town called New York. They're advancing towards Toretsk. They are moving into Chasiv Yar,
which is really important. Chasiv Yar, that is a key logistical hub. If Russia cuts off Chasiv Yar from Ukraine, it'll be very difficult to get supplies to that part of the front. And hence, and that's where you see, I mean, I'm not a military expert, and Brian Berletic is reading this map, but you see just all of the areas where that red is moving. I call it the battle of the bulge, right? Russia's bulges are moving. That is Russian forces moving. You don't see a lot of blue here. You don't see a lot of blue. That would signify Ukraine. You don't see it.
West of Bakhmut, they are encircling Seversk. They continue advancing on Kupiansk. In Kharkov, they also have this new front that they had opened up in Kharkov. The point of opening that new front was to overextend Ukrainian forces. And the Ukrainian military itself admitted that they do not have enough troops to hold the line of contact in the Donbas region and also stop the advance of Russian forces in Kharkov. But now they've taken brigades worth of manpower and equipment and sent it into Kursk. Let's take a look at that on the map. So this was the new front that Russian forces opened up in Kharkov. This is the incursion, the Ukrainian incursion. And even though it looks like they've entered into and are holding all of this territory, what even Ukrainian sources are admitting is that they rushed along roads. There is a Ukrainian troop presence spread out in this area, but they do not hold it. They have not consolidated control over it, at least not yet. It is unlikely they will do so. How can they do so? If they do not have the ability to hold their own territory along the line of contact, how are they going to be able to hold this territory inside what is indisputably Russian territory? Now, people have said Russia overstretched Ukrainian troops by opening up the Kharkov front. Why can't it be a good idea for Ukraine to overextend Russian troops by opening up a front in Kursk? The reason it makes absolutely no sense is because Russia has extra troops to open new fronts. As they are grinding down Ukrainian forces, they are expanding their own military power. They have more troops constantly coming in, adding to the forces that are already there. Ukraine cannot even replace the troops that it is losing along the line of contact.
I comment on that. It is estimated that Russia will have a 2-to-1 manpower advantage by the end of the year. Literally tens of thousands of Russians per month are joining the Russian armed forces to complete this special military operation. Ukraine has the exact opposite problem. So the fact that Ukraine is literally entering into Kursk in order and saying they're not going to occupy it. Well, what is the strategy here? What could they possibly gain? It seems like they are actually doing what they've done throughout this conflict, which is sending themselves into their own oblivion.
They have no troops to spare. They are incapable of opening a new front and somehow extending Russian forces. Russia has forces. They can commit to Kursk while maintaining the same troop levels elsewhere along the line of contact. Ukraine cannot do that. So it makes absolutely no sense strategically or even tactically. This, in the long run, is going to accelerate the collapse of Ukraine's fighting capacity. Now, people are asking, well, why did they do this? Is this an attempt to seize and hold territory and have a bargaining chip with Russia?
That is what we are hearing. And I'm going to end it here because I am going to pull up the document that the Rand Corporation completed and wrote in 2019 about what their plan for Russia has been all along and why Ukraine is so just ripe to be the sacrificial lamb for NATO. And what we are hearing in the mainstream media is, one, there was the idea that Ukraine was going to take the nuclear power plant in Kursk, and that would be a huge point of leverage for Ukraine to force Russia into negotiations in order to begin the process of de-escalating Russia, right? Demilitarizing Russia, creating a situation where Russia would have to give up something in order to get Ukraine out of its territory. Well, they're not going to reach it. It's already been over a week. It's not going to happen. They haven't even gotten close to the power plant. They tried to fire at the power plant. That was intercepted. Those missiles were struck down by air defense systems. So that is off the table. So now they've penetrated 10, 15 kilometers. We don't exactly know the exact number. They've penetrated into Kursk, and they're sitting ducks. Russia has already said that they are methodically destroying Ukraine's forces, destroying NATO equipment, NATO vehicles, armored vehicles, etc. It's going to end up being the same result as what we've seen on the front line. But this time, Ukraine has even crossed what NATO's red line was, because NATO, even though they said they could greenlight attacks into Russia, they didn't say they could invade Russia. They didn't say that, even though, of course, they encouraged it and really brought it about through their greenlighting of attacks on Russian territory. So the idea that this was going to give Ukraine leverage, right? And I'm just going to pull up the Washington Post really quickly, because they wrote in the Washington Post wrote an article about a morale boost, right? And at the end of the article, okay, they said, though Russian officials have claimed that Ukrainian advance has been halted, Moscow announced a counterterrorism operation on Saturday for 3 regions along Ukraine's border and entails heightened security, such as the ability to forcibly resettle civilians, check documents, vehicles, and monitor calls. Authorities can also restrict internet access and limit communications. The Western diplomat, unnamed, they don't want to say what their name is. Before the operation, Ukraine had nothing to negotiate. Now it is different. So, because Russia had to respond, the idea here is that now Ukraine has some leverage. But what leverage do they have? They are sitting on territory that they will eventually be expelled from. They cannot keep this up. They haven't been able to keep it up on the front lines. They are short of everything: ammunition, artillery, manpower, on and on and on. They're short of everything, and yet we are made to believe that because they've taken what they have left and attempted a really just reckless invasion of Russia's own territory, that this is going to be the saving grace for Ukraine is absolutely ridiculous. And this is not just Brian Berletic, and it is not just myself that is saying this. This is also people that have deep relationships to, let's say, the European Union. The attack on the Kursk region may be the beginning of the end of the military of Ukraine. This is from a military expert of the European Council on Foreign Relations, okay? Gustav Gressel. If you don't know anything about the Council on Foreign Relations, well, it is a CIA cutout. So the CIA cutout is saying this is a bad idea, the Europe version of it. Attacked. So this is what Gustav Gressel had to say in an interview with Der Spiegel magazine. If Ukraine seeks to hold territory for a few months, it will lead to military costs that can hardly be covered. The expansion of the front line is profitable above all for Russia. It has more weapons, ammunition, and people that it can use on a wider front. The effect of the surprise threatens to quickly turn against Ukraine. The expert noted that Moscow could send additional forces to the Kursk region, which it is doing, which would first contain the attacks of the Ukrainian armed forces, which it has done, and then tire them out, which will happen. He pointed out that in the meantime, Kiev is exhausting its resources in Donbass, and if the front collapses, Ukraine will have to one way or another leave the territories of Kursk, transfer all of these forces again to the east. There could be greater territorial losses as a result. He recalled that in Germany, the camp of Sarah Wagenknecht, who opposes the supply of weapons to Kiev, enjoys significant popularity. Ukraine may seem like an unreliable daredevil. Berlin and Washington could withdraw their support. The maneuvers in the Kursk region could be the beginning of the military end of Ukraine, said Gressel. Ukraine is in a difficult situation due to insignificant military assistance of its partners. It cannot win a war in purely traditional ways, so it tries risky operations. But in this way, he risks completely losing support of the West, he being Zelensky. Okay? So this is from someone in the European Council on Foreign Relations who says the element of surprise, the idea of trying to stick it in the eyes of Russia, to stick it in the eye of Vladimir Putin, to stick it in the eye of the Russian armed forces, that's not going to win anything but a temporary reprieve and salvo for your own ego. And that's all you hear about is morale boost. Maybe we'll be able to negotiate from a position of strength. All of this is fantasy. In fact, what will this serve to do? You just invaded Russian territory. UAF, the Ukrainian armed forces. The NATO just aided an invasion on Russia's territory. They're not even framing it as a special military operation like Russia did. They're not even framing it as being within the bounds of international law, even though you see some of these Ukrainian officials, unnamed former Ukrainian officials say, oh yeah, it is within international law. No, it's not. But nonetheless, they are boasting about invading Russia, even as they're claiming Russia is simply invading them, that they're giving them a taste of their own medicine. Well, unfortunately, the reality on the ground says that there will be a huge price to pay for this, as there has been a huge price to pay this entire conflict for Ukraine. This is such a major risk that could indeed lead to Ukraine's ultimate collapse militarily, that even places like the Sunday Times, okay, this is the British Sunday Times, invading Russia is Zelensky's riskiest decision yet. Crack troops are being used for a risky counterpunch to Putin that astonished the world, and the fingerprints of Ukraine's president are all over it, okay? So this is from Michael Clark on August 10th. This is Zelensky's idea, right? He never wants to retreat. He never wants to settle this conflict. And here Michael Clark says they were hesitant at first to do this. Manpower and resource problems. Why would you, if you're losing a war, beleaguer yourself deeper into a much bigger problem later on, right? It's short-term aesthetic surface level gains for long-term brutal defeat. That's essentially what they're trading here. Okay. And that's what Michael Clark is saying, is that Zelensky, because of this, is desperate to reverse the narrative that Ukraine is losing. And this was the bold and risky move that he chose, because Moscow has not seen a meter of its own territory invaded since 1941. And there's some who bragged about this, even though this is nothing to brag about, because what happened in 1941? The Nazis invaded Russia. This isn't Canadian Parliament, clap, clap, clap for the Nazis. This is a real and deep problem, right? Russia, what they are occupying or what they have annexed or put into a referendum, those are territories with majority Russian-speaking people that voted in 90+%. There were referendums held, whether you think they're legitimate or not. I am just talking about what has happened. I'm talking about people who have traveled there, who have said this. People now who are under investigation from the FBI, mind you, like friend Scott Ritter. So it also makes some Western. So there's consequences, right? Because even though it may be difficult for Russia to manage, it will also make some Western leaders queasy, as items that NATO has sent are now being used inside of Russia, another threshold crossed. If Ukrainian leaders had asked Western permission in advance, they wouldn't have gotten it, so they went ahead anyway. And here's a little bit of a map of what's going on. Suja seems to be the city. The power plant is very far away, closer to the center of the Kursk city. So anyway, the plan is risky, and Moscow has no choice but to do whatever it takes to snuff out the incursion. They're trying to compare it to the Korean War, which is very interesting and to me absolutely ridiculous, because the Korean War was an invasion by the United States. All right. If you compare Ukraine to the US with regard to Korea, you are making the comparison that people like myself, the point that people like myself have been trying to make, and that I think have made convincingly, that, yeah, Ukraine is in fact a proxy for an offensive war with Russia, just like the United States waged an offensive war in Korea. But it's a ridiculous comparison, right? Because nothing like Incheon is going to happen in Kursk. Ukraine is not having. That's the risk here, is that they can't repeat that kind of success, that brutal success that we could say the U.S. had. I don't believe it's a success. I believe it was war crimes, but nonetheless, they're not gonna get that. Okay, so they need to make a lot of points here. Ukrainian forces around Kursk might hope to extend their reach as far as occupying the nuclear power plant. Not going to happen. A quid pro quo for Russia's occupation of the Zaporizhia plant, which in Zaporizhia, that nuclear power plant is up in smoke as we speak. But all these, and that's because Ukraine keeps hitting it. They're creating a potential nuclear disaster because they keep striking at it. All these objectives will depend on how long and what way Ukrainians hold inside of, inside of the territory. But this is the big point here. Kiev is evidently prepared to risk valuable soldiers and equipment to make some sort of stand in Kursk. Zelensky's critics will argue that this is a misuse of both lives and troops and heavy metal that Ukraine desperately needs to further in the Donbass. Unlike Incheon landings in Korea, this counterpunch cannot turn the war around. Instead, its military success will be measured by how dearly the Ukrainians can make Moscow pay for the eventual recovery of their territory. If the struggle is long and the price is high, Ukrainian forces may feel disproportionate benefit elsewhere. Its political success will depend on how it plays on Moscow's psychology, whether it creates genuine doubt within Putin's circle that the war is really worth the ever-increasing costs. The Kremlin's initial reaction is to pass the attack off as a terrorist attack and provocation, but to them it looks like straightforward war. And this is a big insult to Zelensky and Ukraine, right? By saying that this is going to depend on outcomes that are not going to happen, what Michael Clark is saying here is that Ukraine is effed. When Zelensky, the comedian turned politician, appeared in the Kiev street just hours into the 2022 Russian invasion to declare that he was going nowhere and Ukraine would fight, he took the biggest strategic decision of his life. This week, he took the second biggest and probably the more risky. Why is it risky? Because this counterpunch cannot turn the war around. Its military success will be measured by how dearly they can make Moscow pay. So they're hoping on hope here that Russia will just lose a lot of troops and that it'll be embarrassing for them. But Ukraine won't be able to make any changes on that vaunted battlefield. They won't be able to make any changes geopolitically, politically, militarily, anything. There is no victory here for Ukraine other than the potential for Russia to be embarrassed and hoping that Russians will stand up and overthrow the government and all of this just fantasy. But this is all part of the strategy. Doesn't help Ukraine, right? You think, wow, this is after watching this, you're thinking, wow, this is absolutely suicidal. Why would Ukraine do this? Well, they're doing this because this is U.S. policy. Extending Russia, competing from advantageous ground. And so I'm only showing you, this is the RAND Corporation website, but I'm going to pull up the report now. This is a report that was written in 2019, and there's an editor's note, right, to read and since the invasion, but it was published April 24th, 2019, before the special military operation. And now I'm going to pull up the actual report here, the PDF of the report. Yes, you can see that. Extending Russia, competing from advantageous ground. Okay, so this was written by the RAND Corporation, which is essentially the Pentagon's research institution. It's think tank. Okay, and I'm going to actually go down to the part I want to talk about risks of its overall strategy to extend Russia via Ukraine. Because what does extending Russia mean? Well, in this report, extending Russia means that Russia will be bogged down, bogged down in many different areas of indirect U.S. and NATO support on all fronts, from economic warfare to various diplomatic wrangling, NATO expansion, etc. And this is the portion on Ukraine and what might happen if the U.S. and NATO decide to use Ukraine as a battering ram to overextend Russia's military. Okay, so what will happen if Ukraine, right? If aid is increased to Ukraine, and that these arms then to Ukraine provoke a counter escalation, which is what happened in 2022 of February, committing more troops and pushing them deeper into Ukraine. Russia might even preempt U.S. action, escalating before any additional U.S. aid arrives. Such escalation might extend Russia. Eastern Ukraine is already a drain. Taking more of Ukraine might only increase the burden, albeit at the expense of the Ukrainian people. However, such a move might also come at a significant cost to Ukraine and to U.S. prestige and credibility. This could produce disproportionately large Ukrainian casualty, territorial losses, and refugee flows. It might even lead Ukraine into a disadvantageous peace. This is exactly what is happening. And this is what Kursk represents. It is not going to lead to an advantageous peace, to the reversal of territorial losses. Absolutely not. This is going to continue to deepen Ukraine's absolutely dire situation, where we have already seen hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian troops eliminated. Just how many billions of dollars worth of NATO weaponry eliminated? How many millions of Ukrainians displaced? This is not good. This is a catastrophe for Ukraine, and something that no one should be cheering for. But this is what the United States, this is what the RAND Corporation, this is what the U.S. foreign policy blob, this is what they drew up from years ago, from before the special military operation. That's what they were hoping all along, and that's what Kursk represents, because the United States has encouraged this. So we've seen that even the European Council on Foreign Relations, even someone in that part of the U.S. and European foreign policy blob, they're saying this is the end of Ukraine if they decide to take this to its logical conclusion, which is the wasting away of Ukraine's military resources and what's left of its manpower inside of an invasion of Russian territory that won't lead to any effective gains or victory on the battlefield. Actually, what is likely to happen here is that Russia is only going to get hardened, is only going to continue its war of attrition, and is only going to continue to prepare the unthinkable, which is what nobody in the world wants, which is the preparation of nuclear warfare, of first use strikes. This is what Russia has been warning about when there's been talks about strikes on its territory. So this is a situation we are in when it comes to Kursk, and you can bet everything that Russia is not going to stand down. Russia is not going to lose this fight in Kursk, that whatever gains Ukraine has accumulated over its week plus long, enthusiastic, reckless invasion of Russian territory will backfire dramatically. And even mainstream political and military figures in the Western media are saying so now, and you better believe they're going to be saying so as this continues. All right, everybody, we are going to now get into the last story for today, which will center on China. Okay, and this story, nobody was talking about what's been going on with China. And I'm going to show you what China has been doing first through the ridiculous reports coming out of the mainstream media trying to attack China as a threat. This is how I usually like to cover China. And then talk about how the real threat is coming from the United States military, because that is what the truth of all of this really is. So we're going to get into that right now, because this is a story that got zero coverage. No one's talking about this because, most people, when they see Ukraine, Gaza, West Asia, and Asia Pacific, China, they put China at the lowest level of threat and danger. And that's just the reality because, well, one of them is a genocide. The other is a literal special military operation. It makes sense, but it's a mistake. And I'm going to talk about why. The United States military, its foreign policy establishment, is indeed sounding the alarm about China, but it's not sounding the alarm for the correct reasons or the right reasons. In fact, they do say, and there's a saying that every accusation is a confession. And we're going to talk about why that is. Because what China is actually doing that is shocking the United States and its military and foreign policy establishment so much has nothing to do with the military and with war. It has everything to do with the possibility of war no longer being a necessity or a possibility. So the reports about China of late have been increasingly ridiculous, and I'm going to show you one that has sounded the alarm about China militarily. And you're not going to believe what the New York Times wrote about China now. China's Great Wall of Villages. China has moved thousands of people to new settlements on its frontiers, calling them border guardians. And I'm not going to read this whole article, but essentially, they talk about Qianglin, a new village, sits deep in the Himalayas, 3 miles from a region where a heavy military buildup in confrontation between Chinese and Indian troops have brought fears of a border war. It was once an empty valley, more than 10,000 feet above the sea, traversed only by local hunters. But then China built Qianglin, a village of cookie-cutter homes, and finally paved roads and paid people to move there from other settlements. China's Xi Jinping calls these border guardians. Qiangling's villages are essentially sentries on the front line of China's claim to the Arunachal Pradesh, India's easternmost state, where Beijing insists it is part of Chinese-ruled Tibet. Many villages like Qiangling have sprung up in China's west. They have give its sovereignty a new undeniable permanence along boundaries contested by India, Bhutan, and Nepal. In its north, the settlements bolster security to promote trade with Central Asia. In the south, they guard against the flow of drugs and crime from Southeast Asia. Literally, they are telling you that people are the military here. This is absolutely incredibly ridiculous, but it just shows what they're really scared of. They are scared of people being given homes in mountainous regions with very few resources, where people not too long ago, even into today, are literally nomads and herders, now getting nice apartments just 15 miles to Tajikistan, right? These people are less than 1 mile to Vietnam in these villages, right? Phu Minh village, Shibanjai new village, right? Look at these scary new villages. Well, this is what they say, is that the buildup is a clear sign that Xi Jinping is using civilian settlements to solidify China's control in far-flung frontiers, just as he has with fishing militias and islands in the disputed South China Sea, and that the New York Times analyzed the settlements along China's border to create a visual representation of the country's reshaped its frontiers with strategic civilian outposts. Strategic civilian outposts. And here is that map, okay, of these villages inside of China, mountainous regions, are supposedly creating a border guardian frontier. Well, let's talk about the reality here. The reality is that the so-called China threat is in fact a threat from the U.S. military. And this includes on the borders of China in this part, right? We talk about Tajikistan. China had major problems with terrorism coming from this part of the world for many years, over a decade, not too long ago. It only stopped in around 2016, 2017. And this, of course, is in the vaunted and much maligned region of Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Province, the province of the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. So I want to talk to you, though, about a story that didn't get any coverage. It was not seen as a problem at all, but a U.S. destroyer hints at an encounter with Russia and China near Guam. So what China is doing, in fact, even if it is true, is it's defending itself and developing itself to be prepared for better economic ties with these villages across its own borders, to ensure that development occurs there, and therefore maybe perhaps more people-to-people exchanges, maybe not with India because of the border clash, but you can bet Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, these countries that border China's west, for example, that economic activity is booming. That is the big threat to the United States. But the real threat, what you have to see, is how the United States military continues, its Navy continues to cross China's red line by literally coming into confrontation with it. This happened on August 8th and received absolutely, or August 7th, no coverage. Here's a small video. I'm not going to play the entire thing. It's just a sped up video of how this destroyer literally came into contact with these Chinese and Russian vessels. So there you see, they're literally passing, right? That this is coming very close, right? This is a threat. I mean, China and these are territorial waters claimed, you could say, by China and Russia, but nonetheless, the United States has no right to be here. Look at where it's sailing. That is what is going on. And here's the report. As U.S. warships, Facebook post hinted at an encounter last month with Chinese and Russian vessels near Guam, the American military hub in the Western Pacific Ocean, but the reference was later removed. Okay, so this actually happened a month before. This was published August 7th, happened in July. In a video shared on August 7th, the Arleigh-Burke-class guided missile destroyer USS Rafael Peralta was seen returning to Japan's Yokosuka Naval Base, its home port, following an extended summer patrol. The 9,700-ton destroyer arrived at the base the previous day, according to ship spotters, and its post offered only indication as to the range of the July's joint naval maneuvers by Russia and China, whose ships were said to have sailed together for over 4,800 nautical miles. The Peralta is assigned to the destroyer Squadron 15, the New York U.S. Navy's largest, consisting of 9 Arleigh-Burke-class vessels forward deployed to Yokosuka. The squadron is this U.S. 7th Fleet's principal surface force in the Western Pacific and Indian Oceans. The warship's official Facebook page said it conducted a freedom of navigation operation in the South China Sea, held joint exercises with U.S. treaty ally Japan, and protected Guam during Chinese and Russian deployments in the areas. Protected Guam. So literally, this destroyer is saying that it was actively protecting Guam from Russia and China. But Russia and China were not invading Guam. That means that this destroyer was in an offensive posture against Russia and China, and they did not, and they revealed it. This is the threat. This is the real threat here, is that there are forces inside of the U.S. Navy, there are forces inside the U.S. foreign policy establishment that want to toe this line of all out in full war with China. Photos released by the Navy show the Peralta in the South China Sea in early May before joining Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force in the Philippine Sea in mid-June. On July 18th, the destroyer called at Guam before returning to Yokosuka. The caption did not provide further details, but it was edited after Newsweek inquired about the nature of the apparent encounter at sea. The Navy did not immediately respond to requests for comment of the change. China and Russia did not disclose the exact route of their 4th Maritime Patrol, but said the 4-ship formation transited parts of northern Pacific Ocean for 15 days. The patrol covered 4,800 nautical miles. The Russian Navy's Pacific Fleet said ships from both sides met in the East China Sea, south of South Korea's Jeju Islands, before entering the Philippine Sea via the Osumi Strait near Japan's southward islands, according to Japanese military officials. The Chinese Defense Ministry later said the flotilla sailed southward in the Western Pacific and returned to the South China Sea via Balingtang Channel, which lies between Taiwan and the Philippines in the south. They didn't mention any approach near Guam, but the distance of the patrol suggested their warships could have reached the island's surrounding waters. Guam is the U.S.'s westernmost point and territory and home of 3 major military bases used by the Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps. So it wouldn't be the first time the U.S. military had encountered Chinese and Russian forces near the country's territory. China and Russia sent 4 bombers into Alaska Air Defense Zone last month, coming within 200 miles of the U.S. coast. Of course, Alaska is a very disputed territory given how the U.S. obtained Alaska. But nonetheless, this happened. And of course, Guam being a territory of the United States, what that means is a colony. The United States has used Guam for decades upon decades as a colony for what is happening now, a forward deployment and buildup against China. And this is not even a secret, okay? Because I want to show you a few recent developments that got zero coverage. I'm being serious here. These are getting zero coverage. First, I want to show you RIMPAC, okay? This is an extremely dangerous military exercise that just occurred, okay? It just occurred. It just happened this summer. This is from the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, which is headed by Vijay Prashad, a historian, a journalist. They're making the waters of the Pacific more dangerous. The U.S.-led militarization of the Pacific aimed at China's intensifying the ongoing Rim of the Pacific exercise features 25,000 military personnel from 29 countries. This was written back in July of 2024. What is RIMPAC? It's the Rim of the Pacific exercises, which have been occurring since 1971. The initial partners of this project were Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom, and the U.S., the original members of the Five Eyes. The intelligence network was built to share information and conduct joint surveillance exercises. They are also the major Anglophone countries of the NATO North Atlantic Treaty Organization and are members of the Australia-New Zealand-U.S. Strategy Treaty signed in 1951. RIMPAC has grown to be a major biennial military exercise that has drawn a number of countries in various forms of allegiance to the global north. Belgium, Brazil, Brunei, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, France, Germany, all of these countries have participated in them. On June 28th, okay, and it ended August 2nd, RIMPAC 2024 began. It was being held in Hawaii, which is an illegally occupied territory of the United States. The Hawaiian independence movement has a history of resisting RIMPAC, which is understood to be part of the U.S. occupation of sovereign Hawaiian land. The exercise included over 150 aircraft, 40 surface ships, 3 submarines, 14 land forces, and other military equipment from 29 countries, though the bulk of the fleet is from the United States. The goal of the exercise is interoperability, which effectively means integrating the military, largely naval forces of other countries, with that of the U.S. The main command and control for the exercise is managed by the U.S., which is the heart and soul of RIMPAC. And they're saying, why is it so dangerous? Well, RIMPAC-related documents and official statements indicate that the exercises allow these navies to train for a wide range of potential operations across the globe. It is clear from both U.S. strategic documents and the behavior of U.S. officials who run RIMPAC that the center of focus is China. Strategic documents also make it clear the U.S. sees China as the major threat and as the major threat to U.S. domination and believes it must be contained. So, RIMPAC is part of this, right? More military bases using the U.S. and allied military vessels to provoke China through freedom of navigation exercises, which I just showed, threatening to position U.S. short-range nuclear missiles in countries and territories allied with the U.S., including Taiwan, extending airfield in Darwin, Australia, to position U.S. aircraft with nuclear missiles, enhancing military cooperation with U.S. allies in East Asia with language that shows precisely that the target is to intimidate China, and holding RIMPAC exercises, particularly over the last few years. Though China was invited to participate in RIMPAC 2014 and 2016, when the tension levels were not so high, it has been disinvited from RIMPAC since 2018. So it's a live fire military exercise, okay? The most spectacular part of the exercise is called the sinking exercise, a drill that sinks decommissioned warships off the coast of Hawaii. RIMPAC's 2024 target ships will be decommissioned USS Tarawa, a 40,000-ton amphibious assault that was one of the largest during its service period. There is no environmental impact service of the regular sinking of these ships into waters close to island nations, nor is there any understanding of the environmental impact of hosting these vast military exercises, not only in the Pacific, but elsewhere in the world. It's part of the new Cold War against China that the U.S. imposes on the region. It is designed to provoke conflict. It's a very dangerous exercise, and Israel participates in it. Isn't that so interesting? It does not have aircraft or ships in the military exercise. It is participating in the interoperability component, includes establishing integrated command and control, as well as collaborating in the intelligence and logistical parts of the exercise. And it's participating in RIMPAC 2024 at the same time, waging a genocide in Gaza. So this is part of this, right? You have RIMPAC, you have military exercises that are happening in the Pacific that are aimed at China with vast damage to that region. We see Australia increasing its commitment to the U.S. military regime, increasing its defense budget. We saw Japan double its defense budget over the last year or so. We are seeing the Philippines extend its base commitment to the United States by 4. This is on and on and on and on. And you know what? Newsweek, as they reported that naval confrontation, a literal naval confrontation between the United States and China and Russia by extension, they wrote a report about where in the world are the US and China's militaries. And I'm just going to show you the map. Look at this. Look at this. This is the map of China's military expansion. Do you notice how the United States, blue, they they say there's a base in Havana, Cuba. That is very much under dispute whether that's a base or whether that is something else entirely. But you have Cuba. I don't even see. They didn't even get Djibouti. They love to talk about Djibouti here. I don't even think. I think it might be on top. But the U.S. has an Air Force and Navy base in Djibouti, even though they always talk about how China has this. And then here you have the PLA Navy in Cambodia, People's Liberation Army Navy. But that's it. That's it. And look at the United States everywhere. Canada. Look at all these bases. U.S. Air Force Base, U.S. Air Force Base, U.S. Air Force Base, U.S. Air Force Base. Look at the military bases. You go to Europe, go to Germany, you will see the U.S. military everywhere. I was in Berlin, everywhere. And they're in their fatigues all of the time because they are working in Germany. They are working to provoke that war on Russia. Look at Italy, U.S. Army, U.S. Army. Turkey, U.S. Army, U.S. Army. Jordan, Israel, right? On and on and on. Africa, African countries, Djibouti, Kenya, Niger, which I think has been closed down. This is outdated. And then, of course, look at all these bases. Japan and South Korea serve as the Indo-Pacific Command's largest base stations, essentially, meaning that they're military occupied with literally dozens upon dozens of bases. I believe Japan holds upward of 40 plus bases alone. South Korea is not too far behind in that regard. So this is where the U.S. the military is located. And do you notice something about this? It is surrounding China along what is called this first island chain. Okay. And here's Australia, right? U.S. Air Force, U.S. Air Force, U.S. Air Force. You can go all the way to the Marshall Islands, U.S. Army, where they tested nuclear weapons during the Cold War and absolutely decimated that population and infected them with cancer and all kinds of other diseases. You can watch John Pilger's The Coming War on China about that. But all of this is to show that it is the United States that is aggressive here. It is the United States that is provoking and promoting war with China, even as it claims that China is using people. It's using civilians to become border guardians along its borders with other South Asian nations like India and Nepal, with Central Asian nations to China's west, Tajikistan. This is the kind of narrative that the United States wants to build so that as it continues to militarize the Asia Pacific, we all will accept the eventual consequences, which is war. Because that is what is coming here. It is war that is coming, a war between the US and China. And it's not a war that China wants. If China wanted a war, why would it send people that it's obviously, right? This is part of China's anti-poverty program. This is part of China's overall development project. It is obvious that building homes for people and developing the economy of mountainous, poor regions of China, many of which are very arid, meaning they're not arable, meaning that it's very difficult to, let's say, develop a countryside economy, even to modernize a countryside economy, which is a Chinese goal, right? To bridge that gap between the city and the cities in the countryside. You can't even do that in a lot of parts of Western China because their climate, their where they're located, they're just not suitable for that. So that means you need to have very direct economic intervention, and you need to literally give people homes. They have very low incomes. They need homes. So now they are being called soldiers for China, while the United States is sending literal troops all across Asia Pacific to prepare for war against China. Its destroyers are coming into contact with Chinese and Russian naval forces and talking about it on social media, talking about how they're protecting Guam. When did China declare war on Guam? It didn't, and it never will. Why? Because Guam doesn't mean anything to China. Guam is a U.S. colony. China would probably love to see Guam not be a U.S. colony because that's just the right thing to believe and the right thing for human beings. But China is not militarily going to invade Guam. So why would the U.S. Navy, why would its naval forces say we're protecting Guam? Well, it's because they are building a narrative. They are literally trained on a narrative of a commitment to contain China. And every time they see a Chinese vessel, every time they see the People's Liberation Army, whether it's maritime, whether it's the Air Force, every time they see China doing anything militarily, they are trained to believe that they are on the offensive, and that is dangerous. That means that the U.S. is preparing for war, and you could believe that China is aggressive. You can believe all of this. You can believe all of the mainstream media propaganda. You can believe that China is the real threat here in the world. Believe it all you want. But even if you believe that, then you have to ask yourself, is the United States preparing for war, preparing militarily in this region, expanding its military footprint, its naval footprint, expanding the Indo-Pacific Command? Is doing all of that the right course of action? What will that lead to? Does that lead to some kind of victory for humanity, for the forces of democracy, for the rules-based order? Does it? Ask yourself that question. Ask yourself if that's really what is going to come about here. I'm looking at people like Peter Zeihan, right? Zeihan, they they get, they get really, really aroused by this kind of activity. They think, ooh, it is great that the United States is standing up for freedom of navigation and for democracy against the authoritarian China. Well, ask yourself, even if you believe in all of that propaganda, all of it, you believe all of it, then ask yourself, is the outcome worth it? Will the outcome be worth it? Maybe you think it won't affect you, but you better believe that a war with China will be devastating. Just look at all the reports from the Center for New American Security, from the RAND Corporation. You can look at all of the war gaming that has gone on from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. All of these U.S. sponsored, funded, military contractor funded, Department of State, Department of Defense funded think tanks, they all say very similar things. Even if they beat the chest and say, we won. Well, you read deeper and you see what you won is a landscape of absolute carnage to the world economy, to humanity, and many of them don't factor in the fact that a war with China would inevitably be nuclear, just like a direct conflict with Russia would inevitably be nuclear. That's why nuclear weapons are called deterrent weapons. That's why international law requires that they be labeled and used for deterrence purposes. That's why nearly every nuclear doctrine in the world, even the so-called United States, talk about what nuclear weapons as being deterrent, even if it's a lie, regardless of whether you believe it's a lie or not. The fact is that it is up to a country like China or Russia to determine when to use nuclear weapons for deterrence. And the United States building up along China's border is a reason to begin to believe that these weapons will have to be used eventually. This is just ABC. This isn't rocket science. This isn't even a full-blown analysis of the political and economic realities that exist in this region. Because if we were going to do that, like I often do, then we would talk about China's economic rise, right? We would talk about what China is doing in contradistinction to the United States. What kind of model is it offering? Even the economists and mainstream sources are admitting that China's economic development projects are just more attractive. Most of the global south thinks so. That is the big threat here. The big threat is there's housing developments along the border of India, of Nepal, of countries along China's border. That's a big threat. That's the military threat. What they are really saying is that China's economic development, China's development as a whole, is the threat. And that justifies what happened with that naval destroyer. That justifies all of these provocations. That map I showed you, it justifies all of that. That's trillions of dollars out the window alone, right? Because it's all the unaccounted for money, too. That's over half of the military budget as we know it, not to mention the unaccounted dollars, which is likely in the trillions of dollars, because we know this from Pentagon audits. All this is to say is that it's the U.S. military that's the real threat here, and it is building up toward war, and we are seeing these kind of confrontations occurring, even as the world has its eyes on Gaza, on West Asia, on Ukraine, on NATO versus Russia, on axis of resistance versus Israel and the United States. While our eyes are there because they have to be there, this front here in Asia and the Asia Pacific is not going away. In fact, we are seeing the commitment to a broader war with China only become stronger from the US side. And so we better prepare for war here too. And we better prepare for what we need to do to stop that war as well, because it's obvious that all roads lead to China for the US foreign policy establishment. And that means all roads for us must mean stopping the US foreign policy establishment. All right, everybody, that's it for the stories today. We had a great crowd here today. What a show. I appreciate all of you, over 4,700 viewers. A few announcements, okay? I'm going to have friend of the show back on, Scott Ritter, Wednesday night. Wednesday, August 14th, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Friday, I will have Mark Sloboda, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Okay. And then Monday, I believe August 19th, I'll have Richard Wolff to talk about the economic side of geopolitics here around 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, August 19th. Then there might be one more stream after that. Before I go away, I'm going to be traveling to China, and I'm going to be doing a lot of incredible work to show you the real China. I'm going to be doing great interviews. Tune into later live streams where I make all these announcements right before I go. I'm not going to get into the details of the trip just yet, but just know that there's great, I'm planning on talking to Zhang Weiwei. I'm planning to talk about two really incredible people in China who will give you the first-hand understanding of where China is coming from in this geopolitical climate and context. It's going to be a great trip, a wonderful trip. I'll be there for about 11 days. More details to come as we get closer, but save the dates for all those guests, okay? August 14th, Scott Ritter, 8:30 p.m. Eastern. Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern, Mark Sloboda. Monday, Richard Wolff, August 19th, 2:30 p.m. Eastern. And then not so sure about what's going to happen after that, but I'm trying to stream one more time if I can fit it in. I also have some other work to do in preparation for the trip. But I'm going to do now some shout outs, okay? So here we go. I got some comments on Patreon that I'm going to read first, and then I want you to go to the video description and subscribe annually on Patreon. It's the best way to support this work. Subscribing to Patreon gets all kinds of perks, including first dibs on questions, comments, guest suggestions. You also get exclusive content when it's possible, but you have the ability to communicate with me. I do a little bit of consulting work there. If you have any questions, I'm going to be trying to actually build a relationship with someone who wants some help with writing. They want to get into political writing, geopolitical analysis, and I'm going to try to assist them in developing their skills around that. Of course, I'm only an expert insofar as I do this show, and I've developed experiences writing and doing this show, but I do offer those skills to all of you because I have a commitment to building up people's capacity to fight and promote the cause of peace. If you hear that, three-letter agencies, peace, not for a foreign government, but for us and for the world. Because I don't make a distinction. I look at human beings and I say, we all should have the same nice things. Shockingly radical, right? Anti-American, some might say. So I'm going to make some James said Zelensky is a puppet on Patreon. Thank you for that comment. Phil Nichols says, thank you, Phil. I think Zelensky is invaded to produce a success, however short-lived and futile, to try to fool the West that Ukraine can win so they can send them more money. This is a very good point that I don't think I made too clear if I made it at all, but that's a very good point. So those are the Patreon comments. Thank you, Phil. And Phil has been a long time member. So salute to you, Phil. And that is a very good point. It's again, stupid, dumb. Why? What? It's not as if you already are controlled by NATO. You're the puppet. You think that as the puppet, you're going to do something reckless and convince NATO? It's one of these. It's just one of these developments that makes your head spin, right? You just think, what kind of logic? Well, it's debased. This is what happens when you sell your soul to the most disgusting forces of empire that exist in this world. When you sell your soul to banderists and to anti-human scum, this is the kind of thinking you end up engaging in. You begin to believe in your own lies. It's absolutely ridiculous. So let me get to the super chat here. We got Lucas Brown. Thanks so much, Lucas. We have Noel, who says, you do realize that Russia and Israel are really good friends, right? A huge amount of European Jews are of Russian origin in the first waves of immigration, lots of dual citizens, just like the US. Yes, I do realize this, and that's why Russia has taken the approach that it has taken. It is not directly intervening in the affairs of the axis of resistance. It is not directly waging any kind of war. It is not even arguing that there should be one. But yet the support which for the axis of resistance continues, especially with Iran. But now you see Hezbollah and what's happening with Russian missiles. And why do they have those Russian missiles? Well, because they work together in Syria. So all this is to say is that geopolitics is much more complex than just black and white. Sometimes we have contradictions that emerge, which show us that actually there are times where, yes, Russia will pull the friendship card with Israel and try to de-escalate its friends in the axis of resistance like Iran. But for the most part, the warmer relationship is Russia-Iran. And why is that? Well, because first of all, Israel is a pariah state right now. Nobody wants it. Nobody's inviting. U.S. Congress will invite Netanyahu to Congress, and they'll just bow to him like they're like some kind of paid force. They're just like bowing and bowing and bowing, right? If you see my head motion, you might make some inference as to all that bowing, right? What that could look like. But in any event, Russia ain't doing that, and China's not doing that. Even if China and Russia want bilateral ties, diplomatic relations with Israel, they ain't inviting Netanyahu to their home during this genocide. No. Netanyahu ain't going to Beijing. Moscow will not open their doors to Netanyahu, but yet the Palestinian resistance has been there. All the Palestinian groups have been to Beijing, have been to Moscow since the genocide. Bashar al-Assad has been there, and now Iran. I mean, put it together. You get the picture. Thank you so much, Noel, for that. It's a great point. It's a great point, really. Far, thank you so much for the super sticker. Cannon, thanks so much for the super sticker. H. Durkin, thanks so much for the super chat. That's a super chat. Emblemid Fate, thoughts on Ukrainian officials admitting Nazi-aligned terrorist organization countries arms terrorists in Africa to cause chaos. Great question. Thank you so much for bringing this up. So yes. So for all of you who don't know, Mali was just subject in the month of August, for those who might catch this later. Mali was subject to a pretty brutal terrorist attack, and it incurred casualties both on Wagner forces inside of Mali and, of course, Mali's own military force. And these attacks were quickly responded to by Ukraine as credited to Kiev for essentially sponsoring and training the forces that did this, the militant groups that have been plaguing this part of Africa for many, 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 many years, in which Russia has been invited in because they've seen what Russia did in Syria. And so Mali, Niger, and all of these newly more sovereign, increasingly sovereign countries, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, etc., they've been called in. Russia has been called in to support them. And so what is just so incredible about this is that Ukraine was enthusiastically taking credit for this, as if it wouldn't backfire, as if Kiev has any diplomatic kind of leg to stand on, and as if countries like Niger and Mali, for example, these countries which have of late instituted regimes that are increasingly independent of US and Western foreign policy. They have been, like Niger, kicking out French forces, kicking out US forces for the last several years. They have been moving toward the multipolar world and toward Russia and, of course, China too, and away from their former colonizers. So to believe that this was a good idea, first of all, to even attempt this, that this had any kind of utility, just shows how low and degraded Ukraine's position is, not just vis-a-vis its conflict with Russia, because forget about it. Ukraine has no chance against Russia, right? Forget this attack shows this is desperate. This is trying to, in Cold War fashion, operate as if an attack, an extraterritorial attack on Russian forces elsewhere in the world is going to give Ukraine any kind of political gain. That's what you do in a Cold War. That's what the Cold War was all about during the 20th century. It was about competing modes of political and economic development, attempting to assert their influence by whatever means in order to inflict and delegitimize the other system. So the United States did this with very violent wars in places like Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan during the 20th century. And the Soviet Union did it through building allies, building relationships with countries that were, let's say, fighting against colonial projects. They would build military ties, they would build economic ties, they would build diplomatic ties, and they would use those ties to try to push away the US and Western capitalist influence. That was the Cold War. So here Ukraine is obviously thinking, well, if we can strike Russian forces literally with terrorism, then we will show the world that Russia is weak. This is what these Ukrainian officials are saying. Russia is weak because they can be targeted in other parts of the world, like in Mali. Well, it's a very strange logic given that Ukraine is beleaguered and embattled on the front lines of its own country. Not to mention, no one likes Ukraine. What? Ukraine literally went to the Arab League. You remember this? This was back in 2023 when Syria was readmitted back to the Arab League. And Zelensky went to the Arab League summit and he lectured Arab countries. He lectured them. He's been lecturing everybody. He's been going around to everybody. Latin America, Lula da Silva. He didn't even show up to a meeting with Lula da Silva. He called up, he was on the phone with Xi Jinping, lecturing him. Notice how Vladimir Zelensky has not been in Beijing. You notice how Vladimir Zelensky really hasn't been anywhere outside of the collective West. Nobody likes Zelensky. Nobody likes Ukraine. And now they just lost more diplomatic relations, right? Because Mali, Niger, Sierra Leone, not Sierra Leone, Burkina Faso, these countries are all going to cut off diplomatic ties with Ukraine. And even if they don't do it officially, the result will be the same. Because they trust Russia. They trust Russia's military relationship. Why? Russia has the same commitment to beating back these militant groups, which have literally ravaged these countries and kept them in a state of chaos and underdevelopment. Niger, Burkina Faso, all these countries see the eradication of this uh, fundamentalist terrorist scourge as a key component to gaining the political stability necessary to develop their countries. You can't do that if you have armed groups terrorizing people, if you have people scared, afraid, if you have infrastructure that you're building being constantly damaged by groups that are receiving arms from Western enemies. Because that's exactly what has happened. Where did this all begin? It began in Libya. When the United States and NATO destroyed Libya, committed regime change there, they armed forces, many of them of Al Qaeda like nature, to destroy the country. And then, after the country was bombed to the oblivion, after its government was overthrown, these armed groups, some of them, not all of them, some of them are still vying for power in Libya, they all went, they took their business to the countries of northern Western Africa, and they began to conduct assaults there. And that's what has been going on ever since the Libya disaster. So that essentially is my analysis of the situation. It is that this is a desperate attempt by Ukraine to assert some kind of briggadatio, some kind of statement to Russia by poking it in the eye in a far-flung part of the world. But this is only going to damage Ukraine more. Its credibility on the world stage could not be lower anyway. Now it's even worse. So this won't have any effect on the rest of the continents, including these particular countries like Mali and their relationship with Russia. It's probably actually going to show them that they should continue to strengthen their relationship with Russia and make sure that countries like Kiev, which are openly admitting that they are training these forces, these armed groups, to commit horrific acts, that they should probably strengthen that relationship so they can stop it. Because it's not going to stop. This is ultimately a NATO design. This is a United States design. This is what they want for the entire world. This isn't just for Niger or for Mali. No. The entire world, especially the global south, they want in this situation. They want these kind of attacks. They want this kind of instability because that allows for potential political manipulation, regime change, economic domination, that kind of thing. They want countries in the global south to be unstable so they can penetrate them and make them subservient to destroy any possibility of sovereignty. And now countries like Niger have said, absolutely not. That is no longer going to happen. We cannot survive as people with that kind of condition in that kind of situation. Hence, we need other friends. And look who is over. Look who is fast asserting itself over in Eurasia as perhaps the most impregnable and dominant military force in the world. It's Russia. And look at its years of relations with the African continent. This is what Niger, this is what Burkina Faso, what they're thinking. Wow, during the Soviet Union, Russia, Soviet Union at the time, and Africa were quite close. There were many deep relationships. After the Soviet Union fell, of course, there was a little bit of instability. You had drunk Yeltsin. You had Russian assets being looted. It was being turned into its own kind of neo-colony of the West. But yet, nonetheless, Russia has reemerged as a strong power and one with a vision that respects the sovereignty of the global South once again, meaning that Russia's military prowess is very attractive, and hence you have more collaboration on the African continent with Russia, especially militarily, and then China, especially economically. This is the new world that we are entering. Africa is for Africans, and in order to get there, a lot of African countries are choosing Russia and China to help them build up their strength, sovereignty, and ability to project independence in a real way. That's the fear here. That's why Kiev saw an opportunity, because they know the United States and NATO won't say anything, because the United States and NATO love to see African countries unstable, impoverished, and unable to do anything economically and politically that will be in benefit for themselves, because then they'll go running and begging to the IMF and to the world financial institutions controlled by the West for assistance. And then that's when they can plant their military seed, which is what they've been trying to do, especially since the formal, or you could say the informal, indirect end of the war on terror. Ever since the US has been pivoting to Russia and China, the US has been looking at Africa not as an opportunity to develop, not as an opportunity to build new markets, not even in the traditional imperialistic sense. If you read Vladimir Lenin, you can read Vladimir Lenin, you say, wow, imperialism is a lot about economics. It's a lot about monopoly. It's a lot about ensuring control over capital and being able to, oppress countries so that you can export your capital, so that you can profit mightily on the backs of poorer nations. That's not even how the United States is looking at it. The United States is looking at Africa and they're saying, that's a cool place to militarize. That's a great place to prepare for war with China and Russia. It's a great place to train and to start the U.S. Africa Command, to prepare for an unconventional war, to stop Russian and Chinese investment, especially Chinese investment. What a great opportunity to stop investment. Do you see this mentality? It is sick. This is why the U.S. is in decline, because those who rule the United States don't even consider investment in this, under these questions. Now, of course, you could say, well, after the fact, they believe that their military strategy works. If their militarization works, then they can then control these countries and then favor investment. The problem is overstretching yourself militarily means you don't invest. Listen to Michael Hudson, right? Michael Hudson's been on the show many times. He says, the United States doesn't invest. It's pouring all of its money into the military, all of its money into debt. Then the military is one of these places where a lot of debt is being poured into. Why? Because there's a war to be had. So that's the future for Africa if the United States has any say over it. That's why Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and other countries in the region, especially northern Africa, moving west, that's why they are looking toward Russia and China. It's just a better option. In Kiev, they're going to be kicking rocks. Zelensky is going to be like at the Lithuania summit. He's going to be very lonely. Okay, he's going to be a very lonely guy for a very long time, because he is placing Ukraine's reputation in the absolute, as the Brits would say, in the absolute shitter. Duly noted says, those Russian-speaking Ukrainians were being shelled and killed by neo-Nazis. They were glad Russia intervened. Yes, indeed, duly noted. Horacio Spinelli, encore. Thank you so much. Very, very generous super chat by Monzer Chabab. Thank you so much. From Australia, love your work. Great work. I missed a bit about Putin and Israel at work on my break. If you could mention it again. Unfortunately, I can't cover it, but from this very generous man, UTD Boxing MMA World TV donation, it's a replay. So just scroll back. You're fine. You can listen to it. It's not going away. Don't worry. Adadola, thank you. You are a bulwark. Thank you so much. And Steven Rosick, thank you so much for the super sticker. All right, everybody, you heard the announcements. You heard what I had to say today. Last thing I will say is, before you leave here, go to the video description. Patreon is the best place to support. Annually, you can do, which just makes the cost so much less to consistently support this work. But then there's also Substack. You can subscribe annually. I write articles too, so Substack is usually the best place to read them, even though I share them on Patreon and elsewhere. YouTube membership. We have great YouTube members here that I forgot to shout out. How could I do that? So let me see if there's any YouTube members in the chat. And I'm going to also shout out all my moderators as well. I see Sherry here. Thanks so much, Sherry. The chat was just too fast today, so I cannot go backward. But if any YouTube members, Sherry, I see you. Thank you so much. Desert Mantis, moderator. Where moderator. I see you two here moderating, doing a lot of hard work for very fast chat. Thank you so much. I don't see any other moderators, I don't think, today. So Sherry, yes. Okay. All right, everybody. So with all that said, video description, all the places you could support, Patreon, Substack. You become a YouTube member by hitting the join button right by the channel name underneath the title of this video. Hit the join button. We have great YouTube members. So yeah, Patreon, Substack. You can also do one-time donations, PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee. You can become a member on Buy Me a Coffee as well. Just so many options to support this work. With all that said, everybody, I will be back on Wednesday with Scott Ritter. We have a lot to discuss, especially what's been going on with him. Very chilling moment. I am continuing this work. I am going to continue to do this for as long as necessary because the ultimate goal is peace. But of course, you know, I had a YouTube video completely taken off about Israel here. That's why I didn't play a video of the Hezbollah strikes, because they will literally take down your video. I will actually show you that right now, okay? So you just know what has been going on, okay? I'm going to share the screen. So you just know that this is happening. And know, okay, so here is the video. Where is it? Here we go. So ineligible, okay? Ineligible, removed. This video is removed. Only you can see it. It can't be monetized. Terms and policies. And what do they say? Well, they say your appeal is rejected. You can't watch it on YouTube. It was taken down completely. There you go. Okay? So that's what they're doing here. You want to support this channel by becoming a Patreon member or a Substack member. That's how this channel will continue if anything should happen to it. You saw what happened to Richard Medhurst. You saw what happened to Lee Camp's show. Nothing is guaranteed here. Okay, you see what happened to Scott Ritter attempting to take him down completely. Omalia Shatela. Nothing is guaranteed. So all of your support is very much appreciated as we move into some very dark but very exciting times for the world as we move toward a multipolar world. All right, everybody, take care. Good night. I will see you all again soon. Wednesday night, 8:30 p.m. Scott Ritter. Bye-bye.